Welcome back to our study this week. I'm looking at Titus, chapter 3, 1 through 2. And today we're looking at how we ought to act towards our neighbors outside the church. Now, we've been talking about the government, how we act towards the government. We are to obey as long as it doesn't go against the laws of God. And today we're talking about how we to act towards those who are outside the church. First thing that Paul tells Titus to remind the people is that they are not to speak evil of anyone. Now, this word here about speaking evil is the word blasphemy. We talked about this word when we looked at the commands for older women. He said not to do this. A Christian woman is not to slander or dishonor or revile another person. There are a couple ways people do this. One is by speaking things that are false about another. Another is by railing against or using abusive language towards another. Christians are not to have any part in this. Unfortunately, we have many people today that confuse rebuking with slander. They're not the same thing. Either way, you have people say, well, I'm just rebuking someone, but really they're just slandering them. They're being evil. They're speaking evil about that person, and they're not really rebuking them. They're not bringing the Bible and specific verses to bear on people. They just want to tear them down. So that's wrong. Then the other side, you have people that saying, well, you shouldn't say that because you're slandering. But really what you're doing is rebuking, because what you're doing is bringing Scripture to bear on someone's life. And so some people that don't like Scripture, don't like the fact that Scripture tells us what to do, they see rebuking, like biblical rebuking, as slander. And so we need to fall in that middle place where we're using Scripture to rebuke, to correct, to change the path of someone, but not to slander them, not to speak evil against them, not just to make things up or to speak out of our own personal preference. So we have to be careful of that. But so we don't revile, we don't speak evil of people that are outside of the church. They're fallen people, like we were, and we shouldn't do that. And especially next time when we get into the next verse, in verse 3, then we definitely see why we shouldn't do this. And we're definitely going to talk about that next time. But for now, we just need to know that we don't speak evil about other people. Next thing is that we avoid quarreling. So Christians should not be characterized as someone who is needlessly and inappropriately stirring up fights. You've all met people that are like this. They study and prepare all week so that when they see you, they're ready to, with something that they can really zing you with. They crave fighting, really for fighting's sake. They don't care if they're right or wrong. They just want the drama. They want the struggle. They want the fight. As Christians, we fight, but we fight for the truth. We don't quarrel with people. As the proverb said, we don't answer the fool according to his folly. We speak the truth in love. We contend for the faith. We don't contend for our own egos. We don't contend for our own little hobby horse. We contend for the truth of God. And we do it in love, with gentleness, with humility. We don't do it as someone who's proud and like, oh, I figured out the answer, so I'm going to nail you with it. No, we don't do it that way. We have to watch ourselves because the temptation is there, definitely. But we don't want to use the truth as a hammer all the time. Some people don't need the hammer. Some people do. Some people do need hammers. But other people just need a gentle word, a gentle correction. And that's the next thing he says, be gentle. This doesn't mean that you're to be weak, like you're wimpy or a doormat. You just let people do whatever they want. It does mean that you're equitable in your judgments and fair. It means that you're not harsh or unforgiving. It means you know that person. Jesus is the example of gentleness. He could have condemned every single person that he met. He could have walked up and said, hey, sinner, you're going to hell. Boom, done. Yet he sat down. He sat down and ate with the tax collectors. He sat down with the sinners, the prostitutes, talked with them, knew them. He had the right to eternally destroy every single person he met, including his apostles. But he was gentle with them. Though we are children of the King, and will one day even judge the angels, We are not to use this truth to annihilate all that displeases us. And so we're going to run into people in the world that just annoy us, that are doing some horrendous things, but we need to be gentle. We need to get to know these people. Jesus sat down and knew each person. He knew what was in their hearts. And then he applied the truth. Oftentimes we just apply the truth like a bulldozer, and we don't do anything with the people. So we need to be reminded of that. We need to remember that. We also need to show perfect courtesy. The last phrase is translated in a lot of different ways. You're to show all courtesy, humility, gentleness, or consideration toward all people. There's much overlap between the words that Paul is using between these two words here. He's teaching us that Christians are to act in a kind and thoughtful way towards those outside the church. No matter their religious, political, or philosophical beliefs, or their ethnicity, or sex, or age, we must treat all people with respect and civility. That's what we've been called to do. We've been called to act, in a respectful way to people, whether they deserve it or not. We are to go above and beyond in this way. Normal people don't act this way. It sets us apart. We treat people, even though they might even be horrendous towards our God and the one we love, we still have to treat those people in a gentle way and to know who they are and where they're coming from. And next week we'll talk about why, because we have to remember where we came from. That's the big thing. That's what Paul talks about. He drops that on us. Hey, you have to do these things because remember where you came from. That's what God did to the Israelites. That's what Paul does to the Christians. And we need to remember that. Remember where we came from. Remember who we were before we were saved. Remember who we still are. And remember where we're going only because of what God has done for us. We'll come back next week and we'll take a look at the conclusion of our study here on Titus chapter 3, verses 1 through 2.